Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Robert. Here is what happened when I decided to watch the video clips from the hidden cameras I installed without telling my wife. What I saw scattered everything I once believed about love and marriage. When I met Lana, she was working as a receptionist at a dental office, saving money to take classes in early childhood education. She was kind, patient, and had a warmth that reminded me of my mother's best qualities. Lana seemed to appreciate my dedication to building a stable future, and she understood that my drive to succeed came from a place of love rather than ambition. We dated for years before I proposed. By then, I had been promoted twice and was earning enough to support both of us comfortably. Lana had been talking about wanting to be a stay-at-home mother someday, and I loved the idea of being able to provide that option for her. My own mother had never had the luxury of choosing between work and family. She had needed both jobs just to pay rent and buy groceries. The early years of our marriage felt like everything I had hoped for. We bought a small house in a decent neighborhood, and I threw myself into work with the goal of providing Lana with security and comfort. I typically worked 50 to 60 hours a week, but I made sure that when I was home, I was fully present. We had dinner together most nights and spent time together. The memory that shaped everything about how I approach family and relationships happened when I was 8 years old. My father walked out of my life, leaving behind a note on the kitchen counter explaining that the financial pressure was too much, that he couldn't handle being responsible for supporting a family when every month felt like drowning. My mother found that note when she came back from dropping me off at school. By the time I got home that afternoon, she had already started making plans for our survival. She never said a bad word about my father in front of me, never used me as a weapon in whatever anger or hurt she was feeling. Instead, she simply got to work. She took on multiple jobs to keep us afloat. I spent a lot of time with babysitters and at after-school programs, but when my mother was home, she was completely present. Watching my mother work herself to exhaustion to keep our small family together made me understand something fundamental about responsibility. She never complained, never made me feel like a burden, never suggested that life would be easier if she didn't have to take care of me. She just did what needed to be done, day after day, year after year. Somewhere during those difficult years, I made myself a promise. If I were ever fortunate enough to have a family of my own, I would never abandon them the way my father had abandoned us. I would work as hard as necessary to provide stability and security, and I would never let the people I loved feel the kind of uncertainty and fear that had defined my childhood. This promise became the driving force behind everything I did. I worked hard in school, not because I was naturally academic, but because I understood that education was the path to better opportunities at that time. I took a job at 16, saving every dollar I could for community college. After graduation, I found work as a junior financial advisor and slowly built a career that could support the kind of life I had dreamed of providing for a family. When my wife, Lana, got pregnant, we were both thrilled. We had been married for 3 years at that point and felt ready to start a family. Lana suggested quitting her job to focus entirely on being a mother, and I supported the decision wholeheartedly. This was exactly what I had worked toward, being able to provide well enough that my wife could choose to dedicate herself to raising our child. I increased my work hours to compensate for the loss of Lana's income, but it felt worthwhile. When Connor was born, healthy and perfect, I felt like I had successfully kept the promise I had made to myself as a child. I was providing for my family in a way my father had never been able to provide for us. The next few years seemed almost too good to be true. Lana adapted beautifully to motherhood, and Connor was a happy, healthy child who reached all his developmental milestones on schedule. We were able to upgrade to a larger house in a better neighborhood when Connor turned 2. Lana seemed genuinely content with our life as a stay-at-home mother. She never complained about my work schedule or made me feel guilty for the long hours I was putting in to maintain our lifestyle. I felt incredibly blessed during this period. Lana seemed to understand that my dedication to work was motivated by love for our family rather than a desire to avoid domestic responsibilities. When I was home, I was fully engaged, playing with Connor, helping with bedtime routines, taking care of household tasks that Lana couldn't manage with a young child. By the time Connor turned 4, he was attending preschool 3 days a week, which gave Lana some time to herself while I was at work. She used this time for grocery shopping, appointments, and the occasional lunch with friends. Our routine felt comfortable and sustainable, and I believed we had achieved the kind of family stability I had always wanted to provide. The first disruption to our peaceful life came in the form of neighborhood crime reports. Over the course of 6 weeks, there had been 4 break-ins within a 3-block radius of our house. The pattern seemed to be daytime entries when homeowners were at work, with thieves targeting electronics, jewelry, and small valuables that could be quickly removed. Our neighborhood had always felt safe, which was one of the reasons we had chosen to move there when Connor was born. The idea of our home being vulnerable while I was at work concerned me, particularly because Lana was often there alone. Even though she was home most of the time, she did run errands, take Connor to the park, or visit with friends, leaving the house empty for hours at a stretch. At the community meeting organized to discuss the break-ins, several neighbors mentioned installing security systems or cameras. The police officer who spoke to the group recommended visible deterrents, like security company signs and motion-activated lights, but also suggested that hidden cameras could be valuable for identification if a break-in did occur. I spent the following week researching security camera systems that would be appropriate for our needs. I didn't want something overly complicated or expensive, just basic coverage that would provide peace of mind. I settled on a wireless system with 4 cameras that could be monitored remotely through a smartphone app and stored footage on internal memory cards. The installation was straightforward enough that I could handle it myself over a weekend. I placed 1 camera covering the front door approach, another watching the backyard, and 2 interior cameras with views of the living room and kitchen area. These locations would capture anyone entering the house, while still respecting our family's privacy in bedrooms and bathrooms. Lana had taken Connor to visit her parents that weekend, so I was able to complete the installation without interruption. I tested each camera through the app, confirmed that the footage quality was clear, and verified that the motion detection settings were working properly. The system seemed to be functioning exactly as intended. In my focus on getting the cameras installed and operational, I forgot to mention the system to Lana when she and Connor returned home. It wasn't a deliberate omission. I simply had other things on my mind, and since the cameras were for our family's protection, it didn't occur to me that discussing them was urgent. The cameras were small and positioned discreetly, so they weren't immediately noticeable unless you were specifically looking for them. Over the next months, I once in a while checked the live camera feeds through the app, and there were never any security incidents that required my attention. The break-ins in our neighborhood had stopped after that meeting, probably because the increased security measures and police patrols had deterred whatever opportunistic criminals had been operating in the area. Because there had been no security problems, I stopped regularly monitoring the camera system. The app would send notifications if motion was detected, but since Lana and Connor were home most days, these alerts were constant and not particularly useful. I began ignoring the notifications, trusting that the system was working in the background and storing footage in case it was ever needed. On a Friday afternoon, about 8 months after the camera installation, I received a different kind of notification from the camera app. The internal storage was nearly full, and the system would begin automatically deleting the oldest footage within 48 hours to make room for new recordings. The app suggested reviewing and saving any important footage before the automatic deletion occurred. I planned to spend some time that weekend going through the stored footage, partly to free up storage space and partly out of curiosity about what 6 months of our daily life looked like from the camera's perspective. I was actually looking forward to seeing moments I had missed while at work, Connor playing, Lana going about her daily routines, maybe some interactions between them that would be worth saving as family memories. Saturday morning, after Connor had finished his breakfast and was occupied with toys in his playroom, I settled in my home office with my laptop to review the camera footage. The system had stored hundreds of hours of video, organized by date and camera location. I decided to start by skipping through recent footage at high speed, looking for anything interesting or worth preserving. The first hour of review was exactly what I had expected. Lana was moving through her daily routines, Connor was playing, and a normal domestic life was happening while I was at work. There were clips of Lana doing housework, preparing meals, helping Connor with activities, and taking him outside to play in the backyard. It was pleasant to see these moments I typically missed, and I found myself smiling at Connor's enthusiasm for everything he did. But as I continued through the footage, something began to bother me. There was a silver Honda Accord that appeared in several clips, always parked in our driveway during afternoon hours. At first, I assumed this was a delivery vehicle or perhaps a friend of Lana's that I hadn't met. But the car appeared frequently, several times a week, and always during the same time period, typically between 1 and 4 in the afternoon. I began paying closer attention to the clips that included this silver Honda. A man would get out of the car, always the same person. He seemed comfortable approaching our house, like someone who had been there many times before. What struck me as odd was how Lana greeted this man. Even from the limited view the front door camera provided, I could see that their interaction seemed familiar and warm. They would embrace briefly before going inside together, and Lana's body language suggested this was someone she was happy to see rather than a contractor or service provider. I switched to reviewing the interior camera footage from the same dates and times. What I found made me stop the video player and sit back in my chair, trying to process what I was seeing. Lana and this man, whom I would later learn was Ryan, were clearly involved in a romantic relationship. The interior cameras captured them in intimate situations that went far beyond friendship or casual acquaintance. They were physically affectionate in ways that Lana and I hadn't been in a while. I forced myself to continue watching, even though each clip felt like a physical blow. This wasn't a single incident or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was an ongoing affair that had been happening in my house, in my absence, for months. The footage showed this man's visits occurring 2 or 3 times a week, always during the window, when I was at work and Connor was at school. The most devastating aspect of what I was seeing wasn't just the betrayal, but the realization of how much effort and planning had gone into deceiving me. Lana had clearly arranged her schedule around these visits, timing them perfectly to avoid detection. She had maintained a completely normal relationship with me at home while conducting this intense affair during the day. As I continued through other footage, I discovered that on several occasions when her lover visited and our child had been home instead of at preschool, Lana would lock Connor in his bedroom so she could be alone with her lover. The interior camera captured this several times while Lana was distracted in the living room. There were also instances where Lana had delayed picking Connor up from preschool because her time with her affair partner had run longer than planned. I could see timestamps showing Connor should have been picked up at noon, but Lana wouldn't leave the house until after 1 o'clock, meaning our 4-year-old son was left waiting at school while his mother prioritized her affair. I stopped watching the footage at that point. The evidence of Lana's infidelity was overwhelming and undeniable, but discovering that Connor had been neglected and possibly traumatized as part of her deception was more than I could handle in the moment. I closed my laptop and sat in my office for nearly 2 hours, trying to process what I had learned about my wife and the life we had been living together. The questions that haunted me during those hours weren't just about Lana's betrayal, but about my own blindness to what had been happening. How had I missed the signs of such an extensive deception? Had Lana's contentment with our life been completely fabricated? What had I failed to provide that had led her to seek intimacy elsewhere? I thought about all the times Lana had seemed genuinely happy with our family life, all the conversations where she had expressed satisfaction with being a stay-at-home mother, all the moments when she had seemed loving and committed to our marriage. Had all of that been performance? Had she been planning or conducting this affair even during times when she seemed most connected to me and Connor? When I finally left my office and rejoined my family for the remainder of the weekend, I had to work hard to maintain a normal demeanor. Lana noticed that I seemed subdued during dinner, and she asked if everything was okay. I told her that I had received some concerning news about a client situation at work, which was a complete fabrication but seemed to satisfy her curiosity. Lana's complete lack of guilt or anxiety about her own deceptions was almost as disturbing as the affair itself. She showed no signs of internal conflict about the double life she had been leading. After dinner, she was affectionate with me in the same casual way she had been for months, seemingly unbothered by the fact that she had been intimate with another man just days before. Over the next several days, I found myself studying Lana's behavior for signs of the deception I now knew existed. What amazed me was how seamlessly she maintained the facade of our normal family life. She prepared meals, took care of Connor, managed household tasks, and interacted with me exactly as she had been doing for months. There was no indication whatsoever that she was conducting an affair or feeling any guilt about her betrayal. During this period of observation, I had to make some fundamental decisions about how to respond to what I had discovered. My first instinct was to confront Lana immediately, to demand an explanation, and try to understand how our marriage had deteriorated to this point without my awareness. But I realized that an emotional confrontation would likely result in denials, excuses, and attempts to minimize the seriousness of what had been happening. Instead, I forced myself to think strategically about what would be best for Connor. The footage I had seen showed clear evidence that he had been negatively affected by Lana's affair, locked in his room, left waiting at school, exposed to adult situations that were inappropriate for a 4-year-old. Any decision I made about our marriage needed to prioritize his well-being over my own emotional needs. I spent several sleepless nights considering whether our marriage could be salvaged. Lana had been conducting an affair for a long time, lying to me daily, and using our son as a prop in her deception. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship was completely destroyed, and I couldn't imagine how it could be rebuilt. More importantly, I realized that Connor was being raised by a woman who was capable of elaborate and ongoing deception, who was willing to neglect his needs for her own gratification, and who was teaching him through her behavior that dishonesty was acceptable. As someone who was raised by a single mother with unshakable integrity, I couldn't accept the idea of Connor learning these lessons from Lana's example. After a week of agonizing consideration, I decided to end our marriage. This wasn't just about punishing Lana for her betrayal. It was about protecting Connor from being raised in an environment built on lies and ensuring that he had at least one parent who would model honesty and integrity. I began researching family law attorneys who specialized in divorce cases involving custody disputes. Based on online reviews and recommendations, I scheduled a consultation with an attorney with extensive experience in complex divorce proceedings. When I met with the attorney, I brought copies of the camera footage that documented Lana's affair. He reviewed the evidence carefully and explained that the footage was legally admissible and would be extremely valuable in both the divorce proceedings and custody determination. The combination of documented adultery and child neglect would likely result in a favorable custody arrangement and protection from alimony obligations. He recommended moving forward with divorce proceedings quickly, before Lana became aware of the evidence against her. Over the next 3 weeks, I maintained our normal family routine while the attorney prepared the divorce filing. This was one of the most difficult periods of my life, acting like a loving husband while knowing that our marriage was already over, interacting normally with Lana while knowing the extent of her deception, and preparing to disrupt Connor's life in a way that would initially be traumatic but was ultimately necessary for his long-term well-being. The cameras continued recording during this period, documenting additional evidence of Lana's ongoing affair. Her lover's visits continued at the same frequency, with the same casual intimacy that had characterized their relationship for months. Lana showed no signs of ending the affair or feeling guilty about her behavior. Finally, my attorney completed the divorce filing, and we scheduled the service of papers for a Tuesday morning when I would be at work and Connor would be at preschool. I wanted Lana to receive the documents privately, without Connor being present for what would likely be an emotional scene. When Lana called me at work after being served with the divorce papers, her reaction was exactly what I had expected: shock, anger, and denial. But when I told her about the camera footage, her tone changed completely. She realized that her affair had been documented in detail and that her attempts at denial would be futile. She now attempts to blame me for not being present enough in our marriage. The divorce proceedings took several months to complete, but the evidence I had gathered made the outcome largely predetermined. Lana's attorney attempted to negotiate a settlement that would provide her with alimony and significant time with Connor, but the footage of her affair and neglect of our son made such arrangements impossible to justify. Ultimately, I was granted primary custody of Connor, with Lana receiving supervised visitation rights initially. The court determined that her behavior had created an unstable environment for Connor, and that his interests would be best served by living primarily with me. Lana was required to complete parenting classes and counseling before her visitation could become unsupervised. The financial settlement was straightforward since we had a prenuptial agreement, and Lana's adultery eliminated any claim she might have had to ongoing support. She received her portion of our shared assets, but no alimony, and I retained the house and primary custody of Connor. In the months following the divorce, I reduced my work hours to focus on single parenting with the help of caregivers. Connor adjusted remarkably well to our new routine, and I realized that he was actually more relaxed and secure than he had been during the final months of the marriage. He no longer had to witness the tension that had existed between Lana and me, and he no longer experienced the neglect and confusion that had resulted from Lana's divided attention. Looking back now, I realize that the promise I made to myself as a child to never abandon my family the way my father had abandoned us had prepared me to handle this situation with Connor's best interests as my priority. Although my marriage had failed, I had succeeded in providing my son with stability and honest parenting during a difficult transition. The hidden cameras had revealed a truth that was painful but necessary to acknowledge. Sometimes protecting your family means making decisions that are difficult in the short term, but essential for long-term well-being. Lana's affair and neglect of Connor had made our family fundamentally unstable, regardless of how normal our life had appeared on the surface. Connor and I have built a new routine together that feels more authentic and peaceful than the final years of my marriage. While the divorce was painful, I know that I made the right choice for both of us. My son is learning what it means to live with integrity and honesty, values that will serve him well throughout his life.